It's time to get inside the Giants huddle.
Let's go, back to your huddle.
On Giants.com.
Tempo.
And the Giants mobile app.
Go.
Part of the Giants podcast network.
Yeah.
Welcome to the newest edition of the Giants Huddle podcast. John Schmeelk with you. We are week 2 of training camp, and today's guest to talk about what we've seen so far at practice is a friend of the program, Ed Valentine, who is, of course, the author of the SB Nation blog for the Giants, Big Blue View. He has a podcast as well. We'll get into all of that. But first, a reminder, you can find the Giants Huddle podcast on all your favorite podcast platforms, on the Giants mobile app and at giants.com/podcast. Please find the subscribe if you're on Apple Podcasts. And if you like what you hear, please leave a 5-star positive review. If you don't like what you hear, I don't know why you're here to begin with, to be quite honest with you. But now we're joined by our guest. He is Ed Valentine, again, from the SB Nation Giants blog, Big Blue View. Ed, we've seen you practice the last week and a half. I thought it'd be a good day to have you on here. Hope all is well, and tell the folks where they can find everything you're doing.
Oh, it's at Big Blue View. Of course, on Twitter, it's bigblueview.com is the website. You can also find us on Instagram. You can find us on YouTube. So, hopefully you check out all the different platforms. And John, I really appreciate you having me on today. Nothing happened out there today.
Yeah, it's funny. We actually had this set up before practice. I did purposely want to do it after the first padded practice because we've been out there for a week, Ed. But look, we all have to write about practice and what's happening, and we watch and we're into it. But really, it's not real football. But we had real football on Tuesday here at the Quest Diagnostics Training Center, and it was eventful. So before we hit practice today, let's set the stage. What were you looking for walking into practice today? What's been your major takeaway through the first week? And then we can hit today specifically.
Well, obviously you wanted to see offensive line play, but you wanted to see some sharpness from the offense, which, as you said, it hasn't been real football. But the takeaway from the first few days, has been that the offense has been a little bit sluggish, a little bit behind the defense. You wanted to see some steps forward from the offense today. Those are the big things I wanted to see, really, just cohesion on that offensive line and, and the start of some real football, some real competition from receivers and cornerbacks. So hard to judge when they're in shorts and T-shirts. So it was good to see some fully padded action today.
Yeah. And we'll get to some of the physical contact that occurred over the course of practice. But let's start with your point, because I think if you were looking for the offense to step it up and have a good day, Ed, I think that's exactly what happened. I thought this was the sharpest the offense has been. I don't think it's a surprise that it comes in the practice where they weren't doing quite as much red zone work and they actually let them use the full length of the field a little bit, which makes things a lot easier on the passing game. But I thought we saw more separation from wide receivers, especially in the one-on-ones. It was the first time we saw wide receiver DB one-on-ones than we've seen for most of camp. And I just thought the offense really showed out and did a really nice job, to be quite honest with you.
Oh, I would agree. And it's interesting because I know Friday was the first 11-on-11 that we saw, and it looked ugly for the offense. And there was a lot of, oh my God, they're going to stink, this and that, concern about the offense. And one of the things that I think we've been learning as we talk to Joe Judge is that he's doing everything in increments. And I think part of maybe the issue with the offense the first couple days is he was kind of making them play in a box where he didn't want throws to go downfield. He didn't want guys to run 40 or 50 yards all out. He kind of wanted to build up to that. So the offense was really playing in a really short area. Yep. I thought today they kind of took the leash off and let them play the field a little bit. And we saw what was a much more even matchup today between the offense and the defense. In fact, I think you could really say that the offense dominated the day.
Yeah, I agree. I think Monday's practice, when they started to open things up a little bit, Ed, I think we saw the first Daniel Jones pass to actually travel like more than 25 yards in the air on a deep pass down the sideline. And today it was even more. And you're right. I think just the structure of practice the first week gave a natural advantage to the defense. When we talk about this in the regular season, right? When you're working in the red zone, trying to score touchdowns, you have to be able to run the ball well. And it's very hard to pass in a compressed area of the red zone, especially in goal-to-goal situations, which is a large part of their red zone work. So I agree. I think the structure of the practice had a lot to do with it. And frankly, the other thing is they actually had a one-on-one period between wide receivers and defensive backs going full speed. We haven't had that yet. They waited until they put the pads on to do that. And quite frankly, aside from one play where a receiver fell down and Quincy Wilson got an interception, wide receivers are open all over the field in those wide receiver DB one-on-one drills.
Yeah, really, really encouraging day for everyone that had already decided that the Giants offense was going to be terrible again. Joe Judge has said over and over that there will be days when the offense dominates. There will be days when the defense dominates. You can't ride the roller coaster, and you just have to continue to build, which is an easy perspective for him. I mean, fans obviously live and die with everything they hear and everything they read, and every day is either a nightmare or it's time for a parade. But it's but it was good to see. It was good to see progress today. It was good to see passes completed. I think I got distracted for a little bit because of one of the other things that we'll talk about, and I missed a few plays during a 7-on-7 period. But I can only recall one ball that Daniel Jones threw all day that hit the ground.
Yeah, I mean, I think he had he airmailed one pass to Sterling Shepard during the one-on-ones. But yeah, he was very, very strong. And let's get to it, because I think I did the offense stuff first, because you mentioned that was something to watch for. I agree. But let's not bury the lead here. Here's the thing about the first full contact practice, and this happens a lot, Ed. It's the first time these guys are really hitting somebody since January, and guys get into it. And the early part of practice, they had their one-on-one blocking drill, which Joe Judge also did last year, where they set it up, and they have the alignment against the linemen, the receivers against the DBs, the linebackers against the tight ends and the running backs. And it's basically a one-on-one blocking drill. You block for a ball carrier, and you could already see tempers weren't flaring, but guys were loud. They were enthusiastic. They were into it. And I thought that drill, where you're practicing some of those fundamentals that are so important to Joe Judge, really kind of set the tone for the rest of practice.
It's funny that you mention, how loud that drill was, because where reporters are, where media is up on the patio. We're like 100 yards away from that drill. But even where we were, you could tell how loud it was. You could tell how into it guys were. It's the first time they've actually gotten to hit each other. And yeah, there was definitely intensity. There was definitely excitement about good blocks, about good plays by the defense. And it only got worse from there, actually, or more intense, I should say.
Yes, I think more intense is the proper way to phrase it. And then eventually, I think it was going to be the last team session of practice, but I'm not sure. He said it was going to be a longer practice today, so maybe there was more coming. But it ended up being the last team session of practice, where there was a play where a ball carrier got knocked down. There was some pushing and shoving, and there was a little bit of a scrum on the practice field. And things got a little bit out of control, and Joe Judge was not happy about it. He let the players know, Ed, and he had them do rotating sets of full field running and push-ups for what was seemed like 10 or 15 minutes. I mean, I didn't have my stopwatch on it, but it seemed like a while. And I thought the thing to me that was interesting, and we could talk about what the players said about it after practice, much, very opposite of what it was before, when you had that one drill that was super duper loud and we could hear the guys yelling at each other and all that stuff. When they were doing those runs and doing the push-ups, you could hear a pin drop on that practice field. All you heard was the pads and jerseys moving, the cleats hitting the grass, as these guys basically, I don't know, did their punishment for behavior that Joe Judge did not like at the end of that practice.
Yeah, and John, that silence extended to the media. Usually there's some conversations going on. There was not a word being spoken. The only words being spoken during that entire time were by Joe Judge. And there were a lot of them. and they weren't very nice, and they were very loud, and everybody understood that that's not going to happen again during a Giants practice this year.
Yeah, and I think we talked to Daniel Jones after practice. We talked to Logan Ryan after practice. We spoke to, let's see, who else was there? We spoke to Blake Martinez after practice and Matt Peart after practice, and all of them were pretty clear about what the message from Joe Judge was.
Yeah, and that's just, that they're a team and this is not going to happen again and that's not acceptable. And really, to be honest with you, I don't think anyone should have been surprised. Anyone that's paid attention to Joe Judge ever since day one of when he was hired, he's all about discipline. He's all about team. He's all about, team first and family and taking care of each other and not doing anything that jeopardizes the team itself. And he made that, 100% perfectly clear today. And I would not have expected anything less from him.
No, and the message got through. And look, he wants the guys to be physical. He wants the guys to be enthusiastic. He wants the offensive players to stick up for their guys, the defensive players to stick up for their guys. But he wants all that to happen between the whistles. He doesn't want extracurricular activity after the whistles. And for the players, frankly, to do anything that'll do one of two things. If it's a game, would turn into a penalty or turn into a play where guys get ejected, or in practice would hurt a teammate. And I think those are the things that you want to avoid.
Absolutely. The worst thing you can do is anything, guys are going to get hurt. It's going to happen. Things happen. Muscle pulls happen. Guys, you get torn ACLs, stuff's going to happen because it's football, it's athletic, it's competitive. What you don't want to do is cause an injury to a teammate by something that's unnecessary. And that's why, fights in training camp, they're fun. They're fun for fans to read about, but they're really not a good thing at all.
No, absolutely not. You have to keep things under control for lack of a better term. All right, Ed, I think we touched training camp enough here. From what you've seen and what you know about this roster heading into the season now, as we get to these preseason games, the first one's in about, 11 days now, and then we have the joint practices. What are the main things you're going to be keeping an eye on and watching as some of the important things that could determine how well the Giants play this year?
Well, obviously, we're all gonna be watching and waiting for Saquon with bated breath per se, waiting to see, when he finally practices. But I think we have to see, a little bit of what we were talking about already. We're probably not going to see a whole lot of the first team offense in these preseason games, but as camp and as preseason unfolds, I think we just want to see more days where this offense looks like it can threaten what should be a really, really good Giants defense, because if it can do that, then, there should be reason for optimism heading into the regular season. I mean, the other thing you've got to watch, John, I did a series of preseason previews going position by position, on this roster. And I look up and down this roster, and you can find through almost every position on this roster, NFL caliber players who aren't going to make this team. So the roster battles are really interesting.
No, I agree. What are some of the battles to you that have you most excited?
Well, the battle for the backup wide receivers is really interesting. Because you've got Dante Pettis, you've got John Ross, you've got Austin Mack, you've got, David Sills once again having an outstanding training camp. You've got several guys, on the edge on defense who I don't know how that's all going to shake out. Injuries and everything might have something to do with that, but you've got a lot of depth over there. So for me, those are two that are really interesting. How the backup defensive backs are going to shake out is really interesting. But like I said, you look up and down the roster and you think there are some pretty good, pretty useful football players that aren't going to make this team. And I don't think in recent years, you haven't always been able to say that about the Giants.
And we're going to watch the offensive line like hawks here, Ed. But really, until we get to preseason games and I think the joint practices, I don't really think we're going to know what this group is and what type of steps that they've taken since last year.
The offensive line, I think I would agree with you. I mean, a lot of what the Giants are doing right now is real preparation for those joint practices. You know, we sit here and we watch training camp and we try to analyze every snap and we try to analyze every practice. And the reality is sometimes we don't really know what we're seeing because we don't know the purpose sometimes of every drill. We don't know the purpose sometimes of every play call. And, you know, certain things might be slanted or designed, you know, to help the defense in certain situations. Other situations might be designed to help the offense. But I think when we get to those joint practices, then I think we'll really start to be able to assess, you know, what this team is and how much progress they have or haven't made.
And then for Daniel Jones, what to you, Ed, are the keys for the specific areas he needs to improve in for the overall production to get to the point where the Giant fans want it to be?
Well, obviously, everybody talks about the turnovers, John. Everybody talks about the fumbles, and I didn't think the fumbles were as big of an issue last year. But for me, you know, I talked to a lot of guys through the offseason about Daniel, and for me, what it comes down to is he's got the athleticism, he's got the intelligence, he's got all of the intangibles. You know, he can make the throws. What it comes down to for me is decision making. And does he grow in the area of decision making and, you know, just getting the football out when it needs to be out of his hands? And the flip side of that is basically eating it, you know, when he shouldn't throw it. And I think if he grows in those areas, then I think you'll see real progress from him in 2021.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a really good point. What are some of the things that you would like to see from the offense in its second year from a schematic standpoint?
Well, I think that the big thing for me, obviously, they didn't make enough explosive plays. And some of that is about talent. Some of that is about the offensive line. You know, some of that is maybe about the receivers. But I think you need to see the ball get down the field a little bit more. You know, but the other thing that I would like to see is I would like to see a little bit more motion in that offense, a little bit more pre-snap movement, not as much, you know, just sort of line up and play. You know, give Daniel Jones a little bit more information, give the defense a little bit more to think about. I would hope that we see a little bit more variety. And I, in all honesty, I think we will, because I know there are a lot of people out there who are really down on Jason Garrett, who were really disappointed in him last year. And I still think there are people who are like, oh, he's the former Dallas Cowboys head coach. Why did we hire him? You know, but I think that Garrett was in a bad spot last year. I mean, with no preseason, with no real off-season program, with very limited training camp, with a young quarterback and a young offensive line, it was very difficult to really get to know his players and to really install maybe the full array of what he might have wanted to do. I think he's got a better shot at doing that this year.
Yeah, I agree. And we should mention, you talked about the explosive plays, Ed. There is a potential Kenny Golladay issue. He left practice today. We don't know the details of that as per this recording, which is why we haven't mentioned it. We just don't have the information, and we don't want to say something that ends up changing in a day or a few hours after this goes up. So we'll see what happens with that. But, you know, they certainly, assuming Barkley gets back, and I think both of us think that, you know, if he's not back in week one, it'll be shortly thereafter. You can give your opinion on that too, is that if this offensive line can just creep towards average, they have enough around Daniel Jones where this offense should be able to significantly increase, I would say maybe even almost a touchdown a game from where they were last year.
I think that's probably what should be the goal, to be honest with you, John.
I agree.
If you look at it, I studied this a little bit during the offseason. Giants scored 17.1 points per game last year. League average was right around 25. And with the exception of one or two teams, all of the playoff teams hit league average or above. I think there might have only been one team that was below league average, offensively. So if you're looking at league average, you've got to get to 25 points a game. And that should be doable, with the weapons that the Giants have. That should be doable. I don't see any reason to expect regression from the Giants defense. I think if anything, it should be even better. So if you can get to league average on offense, I think you have a chance to be a really, really good team.
How do you see the NFC East breaking down this year? To me, Philly probably has some work to do, but otherwise it's wide open with the Giants, Dallas, and Washington.
Oh, I would agree, John. The thing about Dallas, everybody looks at Dallas, and there are a lot of people that want to say, oh, because Dak Prescott is back, they're the obvious favorite, and they've got quite a few talented wide receivers. They've got a new defensive coordinator, who hopefully from a Dallas perspective, they hope he'll improve what was a really awful unit last year. The thing about the Dallas Cowboys is they never seem to equal the sum of their parts. They never seem to be what people think they should be. So I have a hard time trusting, that the Cowboys are going to be what people think they're going to be. And for me, the team that I worry about a lot is Washington, just because of the defense that they've built. And they've got enough offense if they get, good quarterback play from Ryan Fitzpatrick. They've got enough offense that they could be a really good football team. The question for me is what are you going to get from Fitzpatrick? Because you're kind of asking Ryan Fitzpatrick to be something that he hasn't been in the first 17 years of his career, So I have a hard time trusting that he's the answer in Washington. But I agree with you. I think between the Giants and Washington and Dallas, it's wide open. Should be really, really interesting. I also think you're going to get to the end of the year and you're going to look at the NFC East and you're going to think, a year ago, everybody thought how bad the division was. I don't think the division's going to be nearly that bad this year. I think it's going to be a very representative group of teams.
How many wins do you think you need to win it?
10.
Yeah, I think 10. Yeah, I agree.
My gut feeling, John, says that based on the roster that the Giants have, they're 8-9 win team, but if Daniel Jones can step up and I think it might be somewhat unfair for people to expect a Josh Allen type leap from Daniel Jones. That's what everybody talks about. But if he can play good, solid football, maybe the Giants can get to 10 wins.
It's certainly on the table. Ed, great stuff, my friend. Good talking to you. The floor is yours. Anything you want to promote, tell the folks about, go right on ahead.
Just want to mention, keep checking out our daily camp coverage at bigblueview.com. And I mentioned it before, but follow Big Blue View at Big Blue View on Twitter for any of my other insights. You can also check out our podcasts. It's Big Blue View Radio. My podcast is the Valentine's Views podcast. You can find it on all of your favorite podcast platforms. So pretty much any place you find this one, you can find our shows as well.
Ed, we'll see you on the practice field, bud.
All right. Thanks, John.
Ed Valentine, Big Blue View. We thank him for joining us on the Giants Huddle podcast. For Ed, I'm John Schmeelk. Once again, you can find us on all your favorite podcast platforms at giants.com/podcast and on the Giants mobile app. For Ed, I'm Schmeelk. We'll see you next time on the Giants Huddle.